Oh, sorry, I'm a bit tired today.
Hi, Joe. How everyone?
What's going on?
You tired?
Sleepy, yeah.
That's a great shirt you have on this week.
Thanks.
That's a new one.
Yeah, no,
No.
I've worn it before, I think.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure.
So here we are. Historic week, I suppose.
I'm tired because of all of the bullshit I've had to wade through every week, you know? Looking at the news, basically.
The headlies.
Headlies is a better term for it, yeah, absolutely. It's reached fever pitch, like it's reached peak bullshit.
You say that.
No,
but
really.
Then next week you'll be surprised.
It can't go any further. I mean, there's, you know, okay, it wasn't in the mainstream, but it's reported, like, on social media and stuff, that Xi Jinping was ousted in a coup.
Oh, yeah. Went viral
yesterday.
on Tenet.
Yeah. And what was the other thing? Putin. I think, Putin's been ousted, or nearly ousted, multiple times.
Yeah, or died several times this year.
Yeah.
But Xi, that had some legs on it compared to the others.
Yeah.
This one it's been 6 days since he was seen in public.
The other thing was Iran. Interesting, you know.
Well, you mean the protest there?
Well, but there were also reports that the Iranian government have been...
The Ayatollah.
He was meant to be dead a few days, about a week
Right.
ago. But I think there was something about in a similar vein as Xi, that the Iranian government had been removed, or...
Yeah, they've all been put on the
Which
house
is interesting,
arrest.
you know. I wonder where that comes from, you know. I wonder which sources that kind of bullshit propaganda comes from. Well, the sources that are the best at propagating nonsense and lies,
Fake news.
and also, and of course, the sources that are who see Iran, China, Russia, etc., as their enemies.
Well,
So-
who else does fake news but the fake news troll factory?
Right.
The New York Times told me that's based in St. Petersburg, so is the Russians.
The New York Times told you what?
The
No,
Russians,
the
the
troll-
Russians do a Russian
troll
troll
factory,
factory. Remember
right,
that
yeah,
special they
for
had
sure,
years
yeah.
ago?
Yeah.
So, no, yeah. They seem to do it sporadically, and they seem to do it more and more often. It's obviously insane. It's really completely insane on the face of it. They know it's untrue. They do it anyway. That's called lying. They know it's fake news. They do it anyway. No one gets any kind of reprimand or sanction for doing so.
Well, it's part of. It seems legitimate, like I've said.
It's
several
legitimate to
times.
lie about certain things.
Well, at this point, it's legitimate to lie about anything that serves our interest, anything we don't like, anybody we disagree with, call them names and lie about them. That seems to be, it's open season on that. There's no accountability anymore. There's no restrictions on media. There's no restriction on government officials anymore. It's on, like, it's fully acceptable to. And the thing about it is that's always been the case, you know. And I've said this
Yeah.
before several times, is that in any kind of war, whether it's, you know, propaganda war, information war, an actual kinetic war, or a low grade war, low intensity war, whatever, especially that the West is involved in or has an interest in, it's always been, and this goes back, I suppose it would go back as far as human history, but certainly in the modern era, it's a legitimate part of military tactics.
Yeah.
They have entire military sections of the military dedicated to information war. And by
The
information,
77th Brigade,
77th
in the UK,
Brigade in the
is
UK.
most well known recently, but
Yeah.
they had GCHQ sock puppetry
right?
going on long before that.
Right.
That's just the UK. I remember in the early 2000s, there were a couple of mainstream reports about it, which surfaced and then went away. But we were put on notice that immediately after 9/11, what we call then sock puppets, what are now bots or trolls, was like a big thing for entire divisions. Like they have
Yeah.
guys who sit. That's all they do. There's even after like 2006, end of the second Bush administration, they created a cyber warfare division. It's got its own military insignia, etc. in the United States, in Pentagon.
Yeah. I'm just looking at one now, actually. Just Britain's GCHQ to wage cyber war on anti-vaccine propaganda. Of course, they spin all these things as truthifying the lies, but that's not the case. They're telling their side of the story, and there's always two sides in any story, in any conflict, in any war. There's always two sides, you know. So by definition, lies become a natural part of that.
Yeah.
And it's justified to tell lies. The fog of war.
for us, this has been a constant in the entire internet age because we've been, aware of it and observed it. Maybe there is just something, though, to your opening observation that things are getting worse in the sense of how often they do it and how they do it. Just as a example to toss out there, I noticed this week that an article published by The Guardian 8 years ago in 2014, authored by John Pilger, kind of was doing the rounds again as a reminder to people that, this exact scenario was warned about. I think the title of it they ran with or accepted, if John Pilger wrote it, was something like
It was
the U.S. What the U.S. is doing in Ukraine is leading Europe into war with Russia.
Yeah, it's
I'm simply saying here that The Guardian would run with that 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, not a chance.
yeah. Well, there was more to it. That if you just throw it up there, Scotty, that's it. It's on The Guardian still today. In Ukraine, the U.S. is dragging in Ukraine, the U.S. is dragging us, i.e., the Brits,
UK.
the West, towards war with Russia, and then underneath is Washington's role in Ukraine, and its backing for the regime's neo-Nazis has huge implications for the rest
Not
of
in
the
air
world.
quotes.
No. So 8 years ago, that was fine. The Guardian, at least, of course, it's in the opinion section, but still, the Guardian was happy to stand by it because it was, journalistically sound. The claims made in or at least a reasonable, argument to make, as far as the Guardian's concerned, that the U.S. was dragging the West, i.e., Europe, let's say in this case, into war with Russia, and that the regime, the Ukrainian regime at that time, because this was just post the coup, so it's reasonable to call a coup based or a government produced by coup, a regime, that there are neo-Nazis all over it, basically. But suddenly that's not true anymore. And there's no evidence that it has changed since then, really. Nothing has changed. In fact, there's plenty of evidence that Zelensky banning other political parties, shutting down media organizations and stuff that are consistent with the idea of a regime, right up until very recently. So there's no evidence that has changed since then, but the narrative has changed. And therefore the headlines change, and neo-Nazis are removed. You don't talk about Ukraine having neo-Nazis, and you don't talk about the US deliberately using Ukraine to drag the West or Europe into war with Russia. And that's exactly what's happened. I mean, that's a very prescient article because it's exactly what's happened. 8 years.
There's one thing I quibble with. In the interim, there was what Russia agreed with too, a reasonably free and fair election in Ukraine, whereby Zelensky won with 77% of the vote.
Right.
I'm only quibbling, though, because de jure he ran on a manifesto of ending
A peace.
the civil war in the East.
Yeah. Well,
That's why he won in the landslide election. De facto, the regime remains, it's more proper to call it a regime, given that that term now means today a government that lacks legitimacy or authority. And has no real power to execute the will of the people it's supposedly representing. That's definitely still the case.
yeah. There's actually, what it suggests is, and again, there's plenty of evidence for it, is that after the coup, because the coup was backed by, to a large extent orchestrated or pushed in a very particular direction by the US in particular, afterwards, when that happens, when the US, you can look up a long list of coups that the US has been involved in. Who was the guy on, I don't know if it was MSNBC or it might even been Fox News, one of the CIA guys or I think it was one of the CIA guys talking about.
He talked to Laura Ingraham.
Right. About we've been
not
involved.
Clapper, Woolsey.
And
James Woolsey.
And he said, he basically said to her that, we know what a coup's like because we've been involved in quite a few ourselves, right? So that's from the horse's mouth, but obviously you can look up, there's freely available information on the number of coups that the US has actually orchestrated over the past 60, 70 years, basically, and it runs to dozens and dozens in different countries around the world. And when that happens...
He boasted about the one they did in Italy after World War II.
Right.
In that interview.
Right. And obviously when that happens, you don't just have a coup and then walk away. You basically have some abiding or, continuing influence in the country and over the new the new regime, let's say that you've installed. So the fact that Zelensky came along and was voted, free and fair elections, doesn't really change the fact
No.
that since 2014 he was part of a government that had been taken over and largely at that point in 2019 was largely controlled by the US, by Western interests basically. And in fact that's it's seen or it's referenced, that's it's agreed upon, let's say, at least by someone who is this person. It's just put it up there, Scotty. It's her name. She's Fiona Hill, a veteran U.S. diplomat who served at as U.S. National Security Council Senior Director for Europe and Russia in the Trump administration. And this is an article that she co-wrote with Georgetown University professor Angela Stent for Foreign Affairs magazine. And they're referencing the fact that the Russian-Ukrainian peace talks, there were peace talks in April, so like a couple of months, or not even a couple of months, 6 weeks after the Russian invasion began, there were peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, and they were conducted in good faith by the Russian side. But the problem is that it was those peace talks, or any potential peace outcome, was nixed by the West, by the US. If you just scroll down to the quoted part. According to multiple former senior US officials we spoke with in April 2022, Russian and Ukrainian negotiators appeared to have tentatively agreed on the outlines of a negotiated interim settlement. Russia would withdraw to its position on February 23rd when it controlled part of the Donbass region and all of Crimea, and in exchange, Ukraine would promise not to seek NATO membership and instead receive security guarantees from a number of countries. So then the next paragraph is, why did this deal fall through? And one answer could be that the former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, upon hearing about the settlement, flew to Kiev to tell Ukrainian President Zelensky that the West would not support such an agreement. So it's like, imagine you're in a country like, and you're at war with a major power, and like your country's facing the threat of being destroyed, and another representative from another country, thousands of miles away, flies in and says, "No, you're going to keep fighting because we want you to." Anyway, flew to Kiev to tell Ukrainian president that the West would not support such an agreement. And according to a May 5th report in the Ukrainian online newspaper, Ukrainska Pravda, sources close to Zelensky said that Johnson's position was that the collective West now felt that Putin was not really as powerful as they had previously imagined, and that there was a chance to press him. They went on to say that 3 days after Johnson left for Britain, Putin went public and said that talks with Ukraine had turned into a dead end. So, of course, this is opportunistic money making, first and foremost, from war, because war is a racket, and people and politicians love a war, especially one that they're, doesn't directly affect them, isn't on their territory. A war that they can have over there type thing, because you can funnel lots of weapons into it, sell lots of weapons to it, to at least one of the parties, or maybe often both of them, make a shitload of money, and no harm done. And out of the chaos and the destruction, you get it. Very often, your companies, there's opportunities for your companies from your country after you've been fueling the war to go in there and get lucrative contracts to rebuild, or to, i.e., loot what's left of the economy of the country that you helped to destroy. That's the reality of the situation, and it's just talking about the peak lies in the media and very strange. Or not strange, but shockingly detached from reality, the opinions that a lot of people have, at least on Twitter. I don't know if that's representative of most people. I think most people who aren't on Twitter maybe don't really have much of an opinion at all. The only ones who have an opinion are the ones on Twitter. But most people in the West, their opinion is, for me, shockingly naive and divorced from even common sense, just basic rational common sense, They're whipped up into a frenzy, of anti-Russian, anti-Putin frenzy, and they cannot think or see anything rational at all. They're just waiting for the next news bite from the media, from the Western media, that tells them, you're on the right side, Putin's evil, Putin's failing, we're winning, get Putin, he's Hitler, yay, democracy, or something like that. It's like, it just blows my mind. I'm really at the point of just like divorcing myself from all these people, you know what I mean? I want a divorce, So,
You want a referendum?
I want
A breakaway referendum.
I want a Russian, negotiated referendum in a lot of Western countries to break away from these people.
So you want some of that there democracy, eh?
I want some of that special Russian democracy.
Sham democracy.
I want a
the
sham
headline said.
democracy.
Sham.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, at least they get a referendum.
Yeah.
Who else gets one? The
People in
Scots got one, but they rigged it.
Yeah, and people in Europe, EU referendums. Oh, you voted the wrong way. We'll
Oh,
have it
wow,
again.
of course, yeah.
The Nice, basically referendums.
The French, the Dutch, and someone else voted on having an EU constitution in the mid-2000s. And it was no, nine, niet. No, that's Russian. 3 times. And then they were like, you know what? Let's stop putting it to the people and just carry on the agenda.
And just do it anyway, yeah.
15 years later,
Yeah, but
von der Leyen,
yeah,
she just decrees. She just goes to the parliament, which is at least that's a sham democracy. At least there's some coverage of democracy, you know.
Yeah.
And she just declares to them how it's going to be.
Except she's not elected. She wasn't elected by anybody.
No.
She was a former German bureaucrat or former German politician who was basically booted out of Germany, extremely unpopular in Germany, and they kind of got rid of her. The Germans were happy to see her go. Yes, shunt her off to the EU, to Brussels, and have her do some crap over there. They're actually, she's involved in a bunch of different lawsuits, or whatever. Not that she started that taken against her. She's implicated in a bunch of lawsuits that are still pending. Basically, she's. We'll have a look at her in a minute because she's been on the news this week as well. But just on the media, in terms of how puerile and mind-numbing it is for me to have to. This is getting back to why I'm tired. This is an example. You don't even have to play it, right? It's about the mobilization in Russia, as most people know about. And this is an example of the crass level of, they're really reaching. The media is really reaching. So there's mobilization in Russia, and immediately the Western media wants to demonize this mobilization in Russia and throw shade at it, basically make it
or cast it as being against the will of the Russians.
Against the will of the Russians, or just completely crap, or whatever, or it's useless, or they're all drunk. Or whatever, But just this headline, right? I mean, the video, don't play the video, but it's just a group of people, and there's just I think a scene of...
And the warning contains some upsetting scenes. Yeah,
which is... And this upsetting scenes is one of the guys, his wife is there, and she hugs him, and the child she's carrying is crying. And this is an article. Someone in the BBC, some hack in the BBC decided that it was good to pen an article for the purpose, I suppose, of making a serious point, attempting to make a serious point that would pitch the mobilization of military personnel in Russia in a bad light. And their main point seems to be that one child in all of Russia was heard crying because her father, or his or her father, was going away for a few weeks or a few months. And that's news.
That's news.
But not
You're
just
now
news.
Informed.
We'll draw the conclusion from it, Neil. Putin's making babies cry, right?
Yeah, he does that. He's awful.
And it's never happened before. Like in any mobilization, like when American troops or British troops, when they're heading off for a few months on a tour of duty or something like that, but none of their children ever cried.
But when they cry, they know they're crying because daddy's going to do something great.
Okay, so this child is crying because it knows that daddy's going off to do something bad.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Subconsciously.
Thanks, BBC. It's really, because I would never have, I would never have been able to use such ridiculous mental gymnastics to come up with that spurious bullshit explanation. You know what I mean? But thanks, BBC, for letting me in on how to really think about these things.
That's what they're there for.
Asshats. Anyway,
it's gotten bad. Yeah, the mobilization was nuts. And not the actual mobilization. It was very smooth, all the way across Russia. There were a few protests for sure.
Yeah,
but like people arrested in the dozens, mostly women, by admission in articles.
Were there any protests?
Pro-peace protests.
Were there any protests against the Iraq War in 2003 that America launched against international law, against UN, with no UN agreement? Were any protests? Do you remember any? 2003, around kind of March, April time? In the US, you might remember one or two. 11 million people in the streets of Europe. Right.
Yeah, but they weren't forced to go fight.
No, but the protests. Protests
against the war, sure.
Against the mobilization of troops.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is unique. This has never happened before, and it's always bad when people protest. It always means that the war is bad. Does it?
if you're in Russia.
Look at this one. More just to get it off my chest. I'm sure you're quaking in your shoes about the threat of nuclear annihilation. No, have you got?
Well, that was the first thing they ran with.
Have you got your duck and cover thing under the table?
You get under the table, yeah.
Just straight under the table and take your iodine pill.
Yeah.
Have you been practicing that?
It's harder than it sounds, actually.
I've taken too much iodine. I think I've been doing it every few hours just in case, because you never know when it'll happen. And I think I might have iodine overload or something, overdose. I'm feeling quite jittery,
Yeah.
Maybe I should stop it. Anyway, there's another example of course, all across the media the past few days. Nukes. Putin's going to nuke everybody. Putin's going to nuke Ukraine, and then he'll nuke the world, and everybody will die. And evil Putin. The interesting thing about this is that the claim that everybody understands now that Putin is the one who unilaterally said, "You better watch out, or I'll nuke you. Don't do anything to piss me off, or I'll nuke Ukraine and maybe everybody else." Right, and this is what the headline. This is one of the many headlines that have been reflecting this in the past few days. Putin will trigger world nuclear arms race if he bombs Ukraine. Not only will he destroy the world, but then people will be looking for nukes as well. He may destroy the world if he destroys Ukraine at least, but that might end up destroying the world. But if there's anything left of the world, what the people who are left, what they'll immediately do is start to acquire nukes themselves, so they can destroy what's left of it. I suppose. I don't know.
This is a morality tale that he sets a bad example.
Right.
That's what they're trying to suggest.
Except
this is them accusing the man who, for the last 20 years, has been trying to encourage the US and the UK to please help start setting a good example to other countries that seek nuclear weapons.
Right.
And of course, they didn't just ignore him. They brought it all to the point where they told Zelensky at the Munich conference earlier this year in January, just before this shit kicked off, you know what? Tell him you're thinking about getting nukes. Watch his reaction. So, yeah, they get to do this lecturing like after they've stirred the pot. It's psychopathic. It's like, this is why everything that they accuse
anyone else of
is what they're doing.
They're doing themselves, yeah. Which is why it's so maddening. But if you just throw it back up, Putin will trigger world nuclear arms race if he bombs Ukraine, and then scroll down. So implied in this article, obviously, just under the video, implied in this article is, and loads of others, is that Putin is the one who has, like I said, threatened to use nuclear weapons while the peace-loving West is just sat back and went, "Oh no, don't do it, don't do it."
Biden last week.
Anyway, so it's a very short video. Just play it there. Hopefully we're allowed to play it, but whatever.
В ход пошел и ядерный шантаж. Речь идет не только о поощряемых Западом обстрелах Запорожской атомной электростанции, что грозит атомной катастрофой, но и о высказываниях некоторых высокопоставленных представителей ведущих государств НАТО о возможности и допустимости применения против России оружия массового поражения, ядерного оружия. Тем, кто позволяет себе такие заявления в отношении России, хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф. Для защиты нашей Родины, ее суверенитета и территориальной целостности, для обеспечения безопасности.
Это не блеф. It sounds remarkably like the Russian for bluff.
Yeah.
It's the same. Это не блеф. Okay,
anyway,
that's very clear.
So,
No,
the point
he
is that
obviously put it in context, and they, in fairness, in their video, they placed his statement in context. He said, and he was probably referring to Liz Truss, but he had the diplomatic class not to say Liz Truss earlier this year threatened to use nukes against us.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I'd like to remind you, we also have nukes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what I find funny about it is that the Guardian or the Telegraph here, pens an article effectively accusing Putin, or going with everybody knows that Putin has just threatened to use nukes, and in it they include a video of him saying that that makes it clear that the only reason he threatened to use nukes is because the West already threatened to use nukes against Russia. But you won't find that anywhere, even though they have it in their article.
Yeah. I know. It's all about the headlies. The headlies, the moment that speech ended, was Putin threatens to nuke world.
Right.
Universally. I checked a whole bunch of English
Right.
and American sites after. Putin threatens nuke world. And that's all the people, well, they hope that that's all the people will retain. That's all the space they have in their heads for. And they're probably right. For a lot of people,
Yeah.
that is all they have. Obviously, there's more to that speech. That speech was, first comment on that speech, like, you know how it was supposed to be on Tuesday night. They had announced it would be 10 p.m. Moscow time or something.
Yeah.
It was nuts. I was on Twitter, and like, it didn't matter who they were. MSM outlets had a running commentary. They had special teams on the go for live updates. You know,
Watching
obviously
Russian
all
media.
the NATO nut jobs, all the Ukraine Nazis, whether you're ambivalent, love Putin, hate him, it doesn't matter. The whole Twitterati was like,
With bated breath, yeah.
he's going to say something. What this again speaks to the fact that, irrespective of the subjective feelings about this guy, he is, as the Myanmar Prime Minister described him in person when they met on the sidelines of some event or another a couple of weeks ago. The world sees you as number one. Whatever title we give you, he said just simply leader of the world.
Mm-hmm.
That is it. That must that is the thing they're constantly suppressing. I think subconsciously, there's a tacit recognition in this person as the most powerful, influential, kingmaker, mover and shaker on the planet at this time.
Yeah.
That's the first most remarkable thing. Of course, they'll drown all that out with, that's rubbish. You would say that. You're a NATO troll.
Mm-hmm.
But listen, I'm watching your words and your actions, including what's implied by the way you treat Putin and have treated him this last 10 years.
Right.
He's supposed to be such a mastermind that he can influence elections with subliminal messaging through a few €1,000 worth of Facebook ads.
Yeah.
Okay, so you really believe that? And Brexit, by the way, and the Catalonia independence referendum, etc., etc. You rain them off. His influence is total. It's everywhere. It can strike at any time. I think these people have talked themselves into a corner where the power that Putin has is in part what they give to him. But it's also, tacitly, they recognize that he is number one because he has the means and the smarts.
Yeah. But they don't want to admit it, right? Yeah. Yeah. But they're tacitly recognizing the fact that he's a pretty smart guy who has a lot of leverage and a lot of control, and they're terrified of it, but they're fascinated by it at the same time. But they're told to be terrified of it. They've no reason to be terrified of it, but they're fascinated by it. You just mentioned like influence in elections. This was from a few days ago. Again, you won't find it really anywhere. Unfortunately, you had to go to RT. I don't mean unfortunately, there's nothing wrong with RT. It's just that it's unfortunate that it's only on RT. But there was a court filing this past week that suggests that the FBI knew Russiagate. Of course, we know this is the truth, but again, it's having evidence to back it up, that Russiagate was a fraud and that the FBI knew that Russiagate was a fraud in January of 2017, but kept it up. But it kept up its pressure on Trump, i.e., they kept it going. But of course, they knew it was a fraud because they were the ones who, the FBI, along with others, were directly involved in creating the fraud of Russiagate, i.e., Russia stealing, Russia collusion with Trump and Russia stealing the elections and all that kind of stuff. But it's amazing, it's really bad, where people are a certain number. I think most of the population, because they either get it directly because they're watching the news, or they get it by kind of, I don't know, subliminally or by osmosis or something, or by hearing it, even if they're not watching the media, watching the news and stuff, that they're getting this message. Because in a lot of places, in a lot of cities as well, it's like there's TV screens or advertisements or news, like in many, many different places that people go, like into stores, into shops, even on billboards, article headlines on billboards and stuff like that. And of course, they'll come across it on any social media that they do, even if it's not Twitter or news hounding on social media, they'll still come across a lot of those headlines. And it's terrible that people in Western countries are subject to that, that they have no immunity, or very little immunity to that level of lies and disinformation, and the people disseminating it know that, and they push it harder and harder and harder. And people in positions of power actively and deliberately concocting fake stories, making up, inventing, fabricating stories, lies about on major topics that affect people's view of how the world works and how how their country, the state of their country, etc., and what's actually happening in the country and who they should be afraid of and who they shouldn't. And the vast majority of it is lies. It's actually being made up out of whole cloth and projected into people's minds, and they just absorb it either actively because that's the only source they have, or passively because they don't, they get it anyway. Like I said, from many different sources, even if they're not looking at it. It's really bad,
Yeah, it comes with wealth. I think that's a large part of it. Lavrov mentioned again that it's obviously a term used a lot in discourse in and around the Kremlin, the golden billion, in his speech at the UN General Assembly. The golden billion, i.e. the Western population as a whole,
Which is what?
Yeah, it comes from good times, you're comfortable. And then for a whole set of reasons, in your comfortableness, it's easier for power to scare you.
Yeah, because you're afraid. You're more to lose.
With terrorism,
Right.
war on terror, then with viruses.
Well, you become weak,
war and
right?
pandemic virus.
Yeah. Comfortableness makes you weak.
It makes you weak because you want to retain it.
Right.
You're
comfort.
kind of being told by them your wealth is at risk here. Do you want to protect your wealth? Well, we can help you. Buy in with us today, and you'll get guaranteed return on your investment. It's almost like a marketing pitch. That at least is subconsciously communicated this last quarter century repeatedly to them. And the thing is, they have objective reasons to believe that it's worth an investment worth keeping, because a whole load of shenanigans with dealing with the 2008 financial crisis has meant that they actually recovered really well. The powers that be, so to speak, the financial system managed to save.
Pump out a load more money.
Pump by doing something that's ultimately going to kill it within our generation. It will destroy it really, really badly. But they bought time, if you like, if you see it that way.
By printing money.
Or they saved it, if you don't even think about who ultimately is going to pay the bill,
Desperate times called for desperate measures, right?
Yeah. It just and it worked. Most people retained a house, roof over their heads, a steady job. Maybe they had to move. Maybe they lost the house, but they came back. There was not a widespread wipeout. Well, there was briefly, but they recovered. As long as it's good, the going is good.
Yeah, whatever it takes.
It's different in Russia. It's different in China. It's different in other places. They are coming into wealth now at various paces. The Chinese fastest. And so there would have to be sufficient good times and then an objective reason, raison d'etre, for, if in China's case, the CCP to go, okay, shit. We've got some external threat out there. The rise of another. The West is coming back, whatever, or some external threat. Now we have to start to bullshit our people. But there's no need for them to do it at the moment.
Right.
But it's chronic in the West that they must be lied to over and over again. They must be terrified. We must keep them on board. This obsession with keeping people on board.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not. I've made major generalization across the West as if it's one. It's definitely tiered. It's stronger in the US. But then the US objectively has means over Europe, for example, to maintain this illusion. We're not sure exactly what they are, but there's a whole array of items. Like, what is it that it becomes known in Germany, in German news, that Angela Merkel's personal communications are monitored by the American government as a matter of routine. And she herself then goes to the people and says, it's fine. Really, I don't want to get worked up about that. That's fine. That's cool. We have an understanding. Okay, that was a mundane example. Fast forward now, and it's like, good evening, my fellow German citizens. This winter, we're slashing our industry by 1/3, and it'll be fine. In whose fucking interest is that? Obviously, it's the United States first and foremost. It's not in the German people's, but there's still sufficient tie-in for German nobles, the elites, the government in Germany to agree to go along with that. That's pretty remarkable. Whatever combination of blackmail and economic leverage the imperial center, the US primarily, can have over the collective West to keep them on board.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's going to last beyond this winter, though. I think there's enough signs. Well, I don't have much hope in particular for today's election in Italy, but again, because we've been here 10 years before when there was a, quote, far-right nationalist party, anti-globalist, that came to shared government in Italy. Mm-hmm. And in the end, through all kinds of combination of financial shenanigans from Brussels and Washington, media lies. The Berlusconi-backed guy, what was his name? Silvio Mattini was booted out. Oh, he kind of hung himself on his own, hoisted himself on his own petard. But here we are today again in Italy. It's sort of, we're back to the playbook 10 years ago where there's the chance of a nationalist, pro-Italy, pro-people, populist government in Italy being elected this week. But, I don't think that's enough to have the set of consequences that would be required to turn this around, namely for them to say to Brussels, look, all this stuff about, just going along with, taking a swinging axe to our economy because Ukraine or saving the planet, there's still such a hold over these people that it's going to require like major, protests on the streets. I mean, protests and a government falls, not protests and everyone goes home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, just, there's a couple of tie-ins of that. Just getting back to what you're saying about Germany, just throw that up there, Scotty, just for, the evidence for what you're saying. I think you're referring to the German foreign minister, right? Where she said a few weeks ago that Germany's she said that she will support the war in Ukraine regardless of what Germans want or how it may impact their quality of life. It's in the first paragraph there. It's a video, but it's actually, the video is, just go down a little bit. It's on Twitter, does it play?
I give the promise to people in Ukraine. We stand with you as long as you need us. Then I want to deliver, no matter what my German voters think, but I want to deliver to the people of Ukraine. And this is why, for me, it's important to be always very frank and clear. And this means every measure I'm taking, I have to be clear that this holds on as long as Ukraine needs me. We are facing now a winter time where we will be challenged as democratic politicians. People will go on the street and say, we cannot pay our energy prices. And I will say, yes, I know, so we help you with social measures. But I don't want to say, okay, then we stop the sanctions against Russia. We will stand with Ukraine, and this means the sanction will stay also in wintertime, even if it gets really tough for politicians.
Tough for politicians? Oh, tough for politicians, not for the people. Tough for the people and for politicians. So, how do you get away with that? That's an example of getting away, like we were talking about a few minutes ago there, of getting away with saying that kind of stuff, and people don't respond. She basically said, listen, more or less, she said, tough winter, Germans having a hard time, energy, heat or eat. But sorry, I'm not going to stop that from happening by stopping the support for Ukraine and sanctions against Russia, because Ukrainians are more important to me than Germans are. And she's the German foreign minister. Yeah. And she can say that, and there's silence. There's no protest, there's nothing. There's no calls for her to be removed, nothing.
But yeah. And two things for me are remarkable about it. She gives the US position fully. The official German position isn't quite so. And there's some... Americans have spoken, American elites are angry at Olaf Scholz for not doing enough. But she still articulates that we are fully with the US position on Ukraine. The second one is that she's fluent in English.
Right.
Now, people probably haven't noticed that because it's sort of seamlessly happened over the last 20 years. But Germans would not have learned English. They would not have spoken English. Gerhard Schroeder didn't speak English 20 years ago. this is part of it's. There seems to be a lag effect where the extent of integration of the European Union as such into and under Washington D.C. and whatever is wanted in Washington went really like sky high over the last 30 years. Obviously, a lot of this was happening behind the scenes. I'm guessing maybe she's a product of a university program, exchange program, where she meets certain people 20 years ago and she's just a teenager.
American universities.
American University. Von der Leyen herself, similar, university, I think, in the United States. But in her case, it's more symbolic. There are others who are just Estonian, French, whatever, and they went on exchange programs, and now they're fluent in English and 100% speaking whatever Washington wants, and they're now in power in Europe. Von der Leyen is specific. On two sides of her family, she can track descendancy from a British slave owner in the United States and a later American family. I think her surname was Ladson or something like that. She's literally from two lines of people that were plantation owners in the United States.
Right.
So she has Boris Johnson is half American. I think he was by virtue of being born in New York, because his mother was American. So it's partly symbolic, and it's also partly through serious concerted efforts. Another notorious platform through which this takes place is the George Soros connections. He had an actual university in Hungary and elsewhere in Europe, I think, where they would try to recruit and attract and then later promote. I think there's some boast by his Open Society Foundation that something like 1/3 to 2/5 of all MEPs in the Parliament are graduates of their programs. It's the extent of this integration into a what they would see as, on the face of it, they would say it's apolitical. It's no, this is just, this is the natural, we don't take sides on anything like that. Obviously, that's bullshit. It's extremely political, and it's extremely pro-American.
Yeah, and it's been going on for a very long time, like you said. It's very well integrated.
But it's really come to the fore when it was needed now, at this time.
Right, well, that's what it was for in a certain sense. It was well planned in advance. I mean, it was natural that they would do that because, the US has always had a desire to, make everybody like us, basically, in that sense, rule the world by globalization, a monoculture to the greatest extent possible, at least a mono thinking in a way, rather than, they want everybody to think like them, to see the world from the American point of view. The rules-based international order, America's rules, which is what obviously Putin and Lavrov just this week not Putin but Lavrov at the UN was talking about. He actually made an interesting comment. He quoted. He was talking about American exclusivity and American, hegemony and stuff like that, and Lavrov, sorry, yeah, and was talking about that Russia and its partners further to the east were pushing towards a multipolar world where there's more fairness, more distribution of wealth and all that kind of stuff. And he said that American exclusivity had become particularly destructive after the end of the Cold War. Already in 1991, the Deputy Chief of the Pentagon, Paul Wolfowitz, in his conversation with the NATO command, the commander of NATO in Europe, Wesley Clark, stated, and then he says, and I quote, "After the end of the Cold War, we can use our military without any fear of reprisal. We have 5, maybe 10 years so as to clean out the surrogate Soviet regimes, such as Iraq and Syria, until such time as there is a new superpower who can challenge us."
We have 5 to 10 years.
And that's what they did.
Yeah.
And
Putin came
right
into power at the end of that time, yeah.
Yeah. So,
and, a couple of months ago, you quoted Paul Wolfowitz and documents like that, maybe not that exact quote, to explain to people the geopolitical timescales through which, the prism through which these people see these things, and the timescale through which things like Ukraine war occur in. It takes decades for things like this to just erupt. Right. So Lavrov said it now.
Yeah.
So someone hears you saying what you said before him, they go, you got it from him, Russian troll.
Yeah.
You see, I see what's going on here. There's an ideological, indeed, a new pole in the Kremlin, and it's infecting Westerners like yourself.
People who would say that are idiots who haven't been paying attention and have only woken up because the media told them to wake up. They've been basically asleep for the past 20 years, or they woke up periodically when the media told them, oh, look at this, and take an opinion on this, and then go back to sleep. So they don't know. And if they haven't been watching, they haven't been paying attention. They don't know that, like, we were saying basically what Lavrov was saying at the UN this week. We were saying that 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And we said it repeatedly and wrote articles over and over again and had radio shows over and over again saying exactly the same thing. Because it was obvious.
It was obvious to us. You can figure it out. Well, you say it's obvious, but we had to work it out. There was no one articulating it.
No.
Except
other
anti-imperial dissidents, so to speak, in the West, who, like us, had to figure it out in the absence of any information from on high, so to speak. We figured this out. No one set the program for us. No one gave us the breadcrumbs of which to follow. We figured this out despite a total information blockade on this in the West.
And not only that, but we were saying that kind of thing when arguably at a time when Russia would not have agreed with it. Because Russia was still talking about our partners in America, and we really appreciate our partners in America and our partners in Europe, and we're all about partnership and stuff.
Right.
You know?
And if anything, we said, well, it looks like they're all in it together then.
Right.
They're, wishy-washy, maybe here and there, the protest. The first kind of time I went, holy smokes. Wow, there's something different here. For me, we're all different, and for me, it was a wake-up call. It was just before the Kiev coup. 2013, August, Obama, he says, there's a red line. If Syria crosses it, we're going in. Weapons hot. We're blitzing this. We're going to do a Libya and Iraq on Syria if they cross that red line. Then, boom, there's a chemical weapons attack, later proven to be staged. And the ships are at sea, the jets are revving up, engines hot, and it was about to go when it didn't.
Yeah.
And the Brits said, yeah, well, we had a debate about it in Parliament, and we very narrowly voted against it. Right. And all the left was like, well, that's jolly good. That's good for democracy.
Yeah. Bit of restraint.
Peace won the day. Jolly good. No, bullshit. That happened as a charade afterwards.
Right.
Turns out they had a good look at what Syria had been given by the Russians since the late 2000s and went, you know what? We're going to lose too many planes and ships if we go in here. Russia's not in there. We're not under direct threat of confrontation with Russia, but it was enough to give them the heebie-jeebies not to do an Iraq on Syria. And that's when I went, hang on, that didn't just happen. That meant that the Russians were watching that scenario beforehand and preparing for it. And subsequent events played it out. Everyone knows now Russia is a de jure and de facto supporter of Syria. But at the time, that was opaque.
Right.
You have to figure that out.
Right.
Huh?
Well, there's also evidence that the West is a coward, basically, that they are terrified of having one of their shiny planes shot down because of the optics.
Yes.
Because the way it would look. They never engage in a fight against a peer adversary, anybody who can really shoot back effectively. They only want to bomb countries that are basically, like shooting fish in a barrel, basically.
Israel's the same today. They'll only take pot shots at Syria, but they won't go full.
Right.
They won't go do a full like Egyptian war, the 6-Day War of the 1960s and 70s, because they know they won't win. We also know that they had hard experience of attempting to do that in Lebanon in 2006 and had to back down with a draw.
Yeah, the evidence suggests the West is not prepared for any kind of a direct contact with a peer competitor, that they would suffer way more than they're prepared to suffer, and it would look really bad. The whole idea of Western awesomeness and American hegemony and its power, and it dictates the rules to everybody else. They just don't want to ever be in a position where they look bad. This is as far as they'll go is with proxy wars, which they've been doing for forever, basically, where they're funneling massive amounts of weapons to some other force in another country to fight their war for them, basically, and they can avoid, any negatives, any of the bad optics, like I said. But yeah, you mentioned Italy there, voting today in Italy, and of course, across the media, far right.
Italy to have its first fascist
/far right. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Mussolini.
Again, like trying to program people with that. Anybody who has a slight conservative bent, or any party that's a conservative party, is immediately far right fascist. And von der Leyen again talked about her, that crazy woman. I think she's actually a bit crazy, you know. She certainly comes across as being slightly unhinged. Here she is talking, I think just yesterday, in advance of the vote today, basically general elections in Italy, and it looks like there's a conservative party will more or less take power, and it's like, oh, willing and gnashing of teeth, oh my God, it's all going to fall apart, this is horrible. What about liberal, faggy liberal Western democracy? It's going to be destroyed by some far right party in Italy. Anyway, here's what she said in response to that, and she's just, again, kind of like the German foreign minister, she's open about it, you know.
We'll see if things go in a difficult direction. I've spoken about Hungary and Poland. We have tools. If things go in the right direction, and people as a body that is always, where always governments have to be accountable to, play an important role.
She says with an American flag behind her.
Yeah,
Right.
in Washington. She's at some
Yeah.
of, I think it was part of the UN
Yeah.
General Assembly.
So
Yeah.
we'll see if things go in a difficult direction. So a difficult direction is that any party that she doesn't agree with and her ilk don't agree with, any party that wins an election in any European country, that's a difficult direction. And that's popular vote, right? In democratic Europe, the popular vote. People go exercise their democratic right to vote. They vote for a party, and Ursula, crazy Ursula, says that's difficult. And as we've seen with Hungary and Poland, we have measures to deal with that, financial, economic measures, i.e. you're not getting any more money because your people voted for the wrong party. This is this is the democracy that we're defending by freezing our asses off this winter, but in support of Ukraine, to support our democracies, because obviously this Putin's invasion of a part of Ukraine is a threat on democracy worldwide, and he won't stop until he's in Washington D.C. on Capitol Hill, right? And
Be still my beating heart.
democracy is under threat around the world. This kind of democracy where if you don't vote for the right party, you're sanctioned, and that's what we have to freeze our ass off to protect. Yeah, it's pretty bad these days. It's really that's what I'm saying. It's kind of peak. I can't imagine it being getting any worse. I forgot to throw this up earlier. Just throw up that picture I sent you, Scotty. Just an example, because it reminded me of the one. Do you remember the one back in 2000? Before you put it up, remember in 2014 with MH17?
Mm-hmm.
Remember there was a collage of all the headlines. Putin, mass murderer Putin. Putin killed my baby, about the shooting down of MH17, which obviously almost undoubtedly was not the Russians. It was some other element that it as effectively a false flag operation. And we know false flag operations are real because just earlier this year, the Undersecretary or the Assistant Secretary of Defense, I think at the Pentagon, spoke at a press conference talking explicitly about false flag operations and how they really are things. People do actually carry out attacks that are designed to be blamed on your enemy when in fact it was you that did it. Anyway, so there's a collage, Putin killed my baby because he shot down MH17. All the newspapers, particularly the British tabloids, but even the broadsheets, even the intellectual ones were very much like evil Putin, evil, with no evidence. It was within like 12 hours of it happening, Putin killed my baby. Anyway, this is an example from Bucha. Everybody knows Bucha, right? That horrible war crime that the Russians committed. Just throw it up there. This is a similar collage. That we have to remember, the great British public and most of the Western public were subjected to this for several days after that particular event.
Headlies.
Genocide, horror in Bucha, worse than ISIS.
Worse than ISIS.
You know, so you wonder why people are brainwashed? Well, because they're being brainwashed, literally, by these kind of lies. These are all lies because there's a lot of questions about Bucha, whatever you call it, that have come out since. There's a lot of evidence at the time that the story that it was the Russians who killed people is not actually true. And then more recently in Izium, when the Ukrainians had their awesome counter-offensive and took back Izium, and they found a mass grave and all that kind of stuff, right? Not like we talked about last week, I think, mass grave with nicely laid out crosses and pictures of people and numbers. It's nonsense, you know. But apparently I don't know if it was at the UN. I think it was at the UN that Lavrov mentioned that they had repeatedly asked for the names of the. Or no, it was Bucha actually. It was Bucha. He asked, I think at the UN, mentioned at the UN that they had asked repeatedly the Ukrainian government or anybody who has them to give the names of the people who died in Bucha, and they won't give them. The other thing I'm thinking about Izium is that the
They won't give them, therefore they won't publish them.
Yes,
Yeah.
and they won't tell anybody who the names are, because obviously the names are important in terms of identifying the people and where they were. You know, a proper investigation of Bucha. No, we're not allowed to go away. It's done. We had our headlines. Didn't you see our headlines? The headlines are done.
Yeah.
Move on.
Yeah.
The message was
Everybody
was
knows.
done. And but in Izium, apparently there was a headline. I don't have it. Do I have it here? Yeah, I do actually. It's the is the UN? Don't know. Let me check here. Just throw that one up, Scotty. Amnesty. So Amnesty International is denied access. So we get the story about Izium, mass graves, strangely laid out in nice, rows of crosses and stuff with numbers and pictures. But this is a war crime supposedly. But Amnesty International has been denied access to the graves in Izium to do any kind of proper investigation and actually come up with an explanation as to what this actually was. Was this a war crime? Of course, on first blink at the whole situation, you look at it and you say, well, this is a place where the Russian troops were. They were fighting against Ukrainians. This was a front line fighting against Ukrainians, regular over weeks and weeks and weeks exchange of fire. And then the Russians leave and you find a bunch of graves. And the conclusion is, well, they're probably the Ukrainian military people that died, right? And the Russians actually bothered to bury them because the Ukrainians apparently didn't want the bodies, weren't interested in taking the bodies back. So the Russians actually went to the bother of it, which isn't the usual thing in war, right? I mean, you in that kind of battle, you kill a bunch of the enemy. You don't stop and bury them in graves. You walk away. You drive over them, basically, you know what I mean? So, but somehow, again, this was spun as you know, it was similar to the Bucha thing. Evil war crime, mass graves. Just more propaganda. That just boggles my mind. And then, what is this? Yeah. But
It says there that Kyiv has withdrawn the organization's accreditation.
right.
For good, I presume.
Well, yeah. Because they actually, you remember Amnesty accused the Ukrainians of using human shields, using
Yeah.
civilians as human shields.
Well, they
How
accused
dare
both.
you? What about democracy?
Yeah.
Shut up. Anyway, Iran. What's going on in today? Started yesterday, I think. The referendums in Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia. Zaporizhia and
Kherson.
Kherson.
Looks like it's. I'm astounded that they can do it at all. They seem to be doing it. They have some polling stations in
Yes,
safer
it's-
places, but for
right.
the most part, it's done door to
mail-in.
door.
Yeah, like collecting them or mail them in or something like that.
Yeah, they've got stations for people who went to Russia.
Until the last day, I think, when they're going to have the 27th, so it's over 4 days. So yesterday, or the day before yesterday, was the day before yesterday, 23rd, 24th, 25th,
Yeah.
26th, 27th, 25th. 30th. So on Tuesday is the only day when people will be able to go, on a broader scale, go to actual polling stations or to put their ballots in a box, across the regions. And they're just doing that for security reasons. And you saw people like on social media, my God, like, I feel like just shoot myself, read, pro-Ukrainian commentators or Western commentators about this situation on Twitter. Pictures of people being escorted by a Russian soldier, or Russian soldiers going to people's houses to deliver ballots. And yes, look, what does that tell you? Under duress, they're being forced, right?
Yeah, they're being
The
forced
fact that
to
it's a
vote at
war
gunpoint.
zone,
Yeah.
and the fact that that there could be any infiltrators around who want to, clearly Ukrainians who want to disrupt this whole process, that cannot be the reason why there are military personnel involved in the voting, right? It has to be that the people are being forced to do it at gunpoint.
They'll always say that.
I know, but do these people not even care? I mean, like, I put myself in their position. I put myself, I've done the mental exercise, let's say, of being on the Ukrainian side where, like, say, my country has been invaded. I could put it even worse, in the worst possible light. It's 1916, or even today, let's say, in some other reality. I'm in Ireland, I'm Irish, and the Brits have invaded. How do I report on it? And maybe I'm deluding myself, but I would not be doing what they're doing. I would be assigning truth to whatever was happening. I would look at it and say, okay, that's, okay, we got our asses handed to us there. Okay, it's not going very well for us. Okay, I'd want to know what was actually going on all the time. The actual facts of what are going on. I would not engage in this just amazing, the convoluted exercise of spinning the story to yourself and then trying to get other people to believe you as well, in like flagrant disregard of facts and logic and common sense.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. How could anybody do that?
Yeah.
I don't understand it, is what I'm saying. I don't understand these people. It's almost like just competing realities, competing my truth and your truth, and whatever I want to believe is true, and I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care what the facts say. I believe that this is true, and therefore I'm gonna say it, and the facts can go fuck themselves.
Yeah.
I don't understand people who do that.
Yeah.
I can't put myself in their heads at all. But apparently they've been using they've got Iranian drones, those evil Iranians. The Ukrainians aren't happy with the Iranians. Say that fast.
No,
Several
that's
times. The Ukrainians aren't happy with
one of the
Iranians.
most remarkable things this past week. Iranian drones are being used by the Russians to target all kinds of things.
Really noisy drones.
Really noisy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you hear them on video.
I just sent Scotty one there. You
Okay.
can throw it up. Just as an example, they are super noisy, but then a lot of drones are noisy. But apparently it doesn't matter, because obviously it alerts you to the fact that there's a drone in there when it's like "Meow," flying over your head, Go ahead. Sound up. They're all shooting. Kaboomba. So apparently all that shooting didn't really help much.
No, there are other videos too. They're firing at them. They can't hit them. I don't understand why they're not being taken down by anti-aircraft missiles that can surely lock on target them. But
Don't have them.
they may not have them. No, but that's Odessa, what we saw there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a report here in Telesur. I don't know where they got it from, but it claims that what they hit in Odessa with these drones was the entire remaining stockpile of NATO Harpoon missiles that the US gave Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
You may remember those because they're supposedly involved in attacking Russian ships in the Black
Right.
Sea. Russia destroys stockpile of NATO Harpoon missiles. Okay. That's citing the Russian general who gives the updates from the MOD. Okay, well that's their claim. No reason to disbelieve it.
Mm-hmm.
That may speak to what there have been other attacks as well. Apparently today, one of these drones took out the command headquarters for the Ukrainian forces in Odessa, killing God knows how many of them.
Mm-hmm.
I have video of it, but won't bother playing because the Ukrainians have taken to, masking all the landscape to try and hide where it is, but as if the Russians can't figure out where they themselves are shooting at. So there's been quite a few of these strikes with these drones in in and around Odessa. I think it's we have to pause for a second and take stock of this. Iranian drones, built, designed in Iran, despite being under sanctions from the West, like up the wazoo, for decades longer than Russia. They've developed drones that the Russians want and obviously can use tactically. Apparently also they can seek and destroy HIMARS, the top US missile tech anywhere in Ukraine. I don't know if that's been effective yet, but they're being bought by the Russians to use in a war in the Black Sea. Let's say it's in Europe, right? Everyone's calling Ukraine Europe now that it's being attacked by barbarians from the east.
Yeah.
Well, take full stock of that picture. Iranians teaming up with the Russians to wipe out the best, I would imagine, at least the best weapons that the United States can export to take on the Russians. The world has changed. It's a whole new world. Sanctions didn't matter a damn. Maybe it delayed this point in history. But it reminds me of what you were saying years ago, that the inevitable process of technology, of modern technology, is that everyone would eventually have access to it. Whether it's via the way that they constantly accuse China of doing, of stealing our IP, stealing all our technology and just making copycat versions of it. Oh, sure, there's some of that goes on. But then innovation kicks in and they start to actually design them and improve them and come up with new ideas based on the operational experience that country or war in the region has been subject to. So these drones aren't just a copycat of something American. They actually innovated their own system that could seek, avoid detection, and serve as a missile, like a cruise missile.
Yeah.
Obviously based on Iran's experience with, all kinds of border wars. Yemen for starters, Iraq, of course, going back to the 2000s. And apparently this thing, despite you see in the videos, like they don't seem to be moving that fast, but they haven't been able to shoot them down. And they're taking out large volumes of stock, of NATO stock. So maybe I'm not going to oversell this and say, wow, this is a technological game changer, but it's one more that speaks to the trend of something that was always going to happen. Technology is such that everyone was going to industrialize eventually. Everyone was going to have the same tools eventually.
Well, I
we
mean,
were always heading towards a more level playing field in the world order.
And it's been
militarily, economically, more and more. And the last gasp thing that they won't let go of is politically. They won't accept it. That's why we have these wars with Russia. Russia's saying to them, not New World Order, they don't use that term, but Lavrov again mentioned at the UN, 500 years of Western dominance is coming to an end. There are natural historical processes that are bringing it to that end, but certain Anglo-American clique can't let go of that, and accept that this is the way of the future. This is why multipolarity isn't an ideology per se. It's an objective process, it's independent of what you believe. You can't wish it away.
It's a natural order. It's a natural order of things, obviously, is multipolarity. If you want to live in a just, fair, free society, it has to be multipolar. Like global society, it has to be multipolar. You can't have one country dictating rules to everybody else and, and paying the price for it. But, I mean, it's like for most of the modern era, you had, like you said, the Anglo-American or the Western European empire, basically, rode high on the hog, basically, and ruled the world because in their own minds, they were, well, listen, we're obviously better at this, right? We subjugate other cultures because we can, right? What's that phrase? The strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must. That was the ideology. Well, let's go and see, and if anybody wants to compete with us and try and stop us or whatever, we'll see if they can beat us or if they can create a stalemate, then fine, we'll have to accept that. But they found that they, using a lot of dirty tactics and immoral practices, let's say, they they went ahead and ruled the world. But by their own kind of definition of that, or their own rationale, if when other parts of this, the subjugated world, let's say, or the second and third world, when they, after a period of time, a natural order starts to come out where those countries rise up and become more economically developed and technologically developed and population more informed and literate and all that kind of stuff, when at that point you would have to accept that you can no longer dominate the world the way you have based on that criteria. These people now can push back, and we're seeing evidence of it. They can push back against you and say no, tell you no. And at that point, you have to, if you're a reasonable person, say, okay, it was good while it lasted, but game over, right? We got to now accept that multipolar world. But that's not what they're doing. And that's the problem, you know? It's like a parent trying to keep their child, even though they're 27 years old, force them to obey their every command like as if they're 3 years old. You know? I mean, you don't do that unless you're a pathological parent. And this is what we're dealing with in the West today. It's pathology based on those 500 years of exceptionalism and hegemony, you know? So they can't have it both ways. Sure, they had it for a long time, and we would have to accept, okay, you were strong, they were weak, you won, but now they're not weak anymore, so what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to manipulate and bludgeon them, and if I can't maintain my position of living, of being the world's hegemon, well, then I'm going to wreck it all. And that seems to be like the wind is blowing in that direction, where they seem to be of a mind to destroy it all. If we can't have it, no one else can have it.
Yeah. There's one interesting twist along the way to it, but you can see how it's still a twist. Scholz has more than once this year used the term multipolarity. It's the first time I'm aware of a Western leader just acknowledged the damn term. Mm-hmm. But he's trying to use it in a certain way. He tweeted, for example, in March this year, in May, Putin's war is not the sole reason for a global watershed. In this multipolar world, very different countries with glowing influence are demanding a greater political participation. This is not a threat. We will open up new ways of cooperation. He goes on to say that, to twist it, that Putin is the threat to multipolarity. So he's acknowledging, there's something real going on here, but he is by definition in his actions, he's working against multilateralism. He's trying to fall back on, well, we Westerners, you know, with our cooperation with each other and our uniform stance on all things current, we're being multilateral.
Amongst yourself,
he's being anachronistic and a throwback to an old world. You see,
well, that's projection. Again, you get into like pathology and psychological pathology, and there's a psychological term for what he's conveying there, which is, it's a very basic one, projection, right? Someone who has dominated or has been part of the clique that have dominated for so long, when they see someone else coming along and say, "Listen, we should share because we're able to, you know, we're able to manage ourselves now. You know, we're kind of fairly powerful, and we need to share the spoils among all the rest of us as well. You know, and the people who hear that, who've been living high on the hog for so long, or have been the hegemon for so long, they say, I know what your game is. You want to replace me.
Yeah.
You want to subjugate me. Like I subjugated you, you want to subjugate me now. So it's projection.
Yeah. They've come to believe that hegemony is a natural order.
Right.
That it's inherently necessary to have a very tight and quite a steep hierarchy at that, because without it, there's just chaos.
Right.
We've quoted a bunch of U.S. think tankers over the years who've said, you know, but if our system falls, it's just anarchy.
Right.
It's just law of the jungle.
Well, that's
we
again.
Can't have that.
Again, immediately, everything saying psychological, pathology, psychological, disturbed characters, effectively disturbed psychology, were that phrase, "You're no good on your own," you know, with the gaslighting, let's use the male female thing. A husband, abusing his wife or whatever, and when she tries to leave, convinces her you're no good on your own. You won't be able to do it on your own. You're useless. You got to stay with me, and it's all just a psychological ploy, and it comes from a disturbed psychology, and that's what we're dealing with in the West on a broad kind of macro scale. We're dealing with pathology, psychological pathology, and it's going to be difficult to root it out.
Yeah. Coming back to these referenda, did you find it like a bit, like when I heard that they're going to hold them, like he announced it last Wednesday and they started 2 days later. It's a bit crazy and rushed, no?
Well, I mean,
Do you think something,
planned?
one of the guys, I think it's Pushilin, the head of the DPR, said that we had to change plans. This was meant to take place later. So,
right. Well, there's some suggestion that it was a response to the whole Izium, the counter-offensive from the Ukrainians. You know, it was effectively a defensive maneuver. It is effectively a defensive maneuver to bring that forward and to not wait until they control the full territory of those four. Well, they have basically all of Lugansk, about 55% of Donetsk, and about 40 of the other two or something.
Well,
like
they have almost all of Kherson.
Well, all of Kherson,
and
yeah.
most of Zaporizhia.
No,
But
I think it's one of them's 50-something%. I mean,
that's Donetsk, actually. Ironically, it's the
right.
one place that Russia has already said we recognize as separate.
Yeah. But to wait before we have control over the administrative borders of those completely, we'll go ahead and make it a fact on the ground now, because we allow for the fact that that offensive, or what we talked about that last week, the Izium offensive that was faded in the media repeatedly over and over again, where the Russians basically left that this was these referenda are a response to that, basically, that had to be brought forward, let's say.
Okay. Now, it's just 4 regions.
Yeah.
Do you think this is Russia saying we'll stop here? This will be the only 4? What about Kharkiv? What about Nikolaev? What about Odessa?
Odessa, I think it's hard to know. Again, you don't know, because is that in the planning? You know, how long was this in the planning? Obviously, this was in the planning for a long time. They always had planned to take all of Donetsk, all of Luhansk, and it's reasonable to assume those other 2 adjoining oblasts. But is Odessa on the cards? I mean, ask Putin. What do you call it? Check. Well, it's like this. I mean, if you want the simple version of it,
we could have another round of this later.
Yeah, the simple version is this.
I saw that before coming down.
Done.
That is simple. And Transnistria.
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, I think the main thing at this point is how the West is going to respond, because obviously this isn't just a actual land grab, if you want to call it that, or the incorporation of these territories into Russia, but as we know, it's and the Russians have stated that this is now, once this happens, this will be Russian territory.
Is that why this was important for them to get this? Because they obviously don't care about international recognition, but it's
escalation
Putin
for
is
sure.
always legalistic, and this seemed to be important to
well, it's legalistic.
say, oh, now you're
Right.
on Russian land, so
Right.
get out, or else.
Right. But that's, I mean, you
Which
can call it
justifies escalation of.
well, it is escalation by saying that, by
Right.
saying this is Russian land. So any more attacks against this territory are attacks on Russia, which is very different from what it's been so far. Which is why it's been called a special operation. You know, it hasn't been a war. The Russians haven't been waging war against Ukraine from their perspective, and certainly from a practical perspective, they haven't been waging war because they could do far more than they have been doing. But this, the question is, how does the West, in particular, mainly the US, the Anglo-Americans, the Americans and Brits, let's say, how do they respond to it? The statement that, listen, you're a party to the conflict. You're already a party to the conflict, but you've been a party to a conflict between Russia, with Russia and Ukraine, in Ukraine. From now on, from next Tuesday, you'll actually be party to a conflict against Russia. You may as well be bombing Moscow. That's the way we're going to look at it.
Right.
What do they do in response to that? That's the question we don't know.
Right.
I think it's, obviously the Russians have been very restrained.
Uh-huh.
So I don't think all this talk of the scaremongering for the public about nuclear war and all that kind of stuff, it's just that scaremongering.
Yeah, even Jordan Peterson, he said, nah,
Yeah.
in response to Piers Morgan.
Exactly.
We're not looking at nuclear Armageddon.
Right. We're not. And but it's playing the game basically. It's you know, it's this strategy. It's move and counter move and all that kind of stuff. And even if they do, the West may decide to disregard it, you know, more or less, and just carry on. As if nothing has changed. And Russia
Sham democracy, sham referenda. So
it
it's
means
still
nothing.
Ukraine.
Right. It's still Ukraine as far as we're concerned, so we're going to carry on supplying Ukraine and helping Ukraine to actually fight this war.
So the onus will still be on Russia to do the actual escalation. The legal escalation won't do anything.
Probably
change.
not. No. I mean,
But this is a legal
The West-
escalation plus a partial mobilization.
the West doesn't give much credit to international law, as we've seen,
Yeah.
particularly in Iraq and Libya and Syria. So, yeah, I don't know. But Russia may scale it up. I mean, there's been talk of obviously extra 300,000 troops. I mean, again, people think these are a
Not
bunch
all
of,
sent to Ukraine, but
no,
to draw from. Yeah.
well, actually, to replace, to protect borders. Like, it's interesting because those 300, if you look at it, the 300,000 extra troops called up, there's been some mention of 800 units of aviation, of aircraft, basically, of Russian Air Force aircraft brought closer to the border with Ukraine. And if you look at it in terms of that coming at the same time as the referenda, it sounds like they're preparing for an escalation, if you know what I mean, for something bigger happening for them.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, going on the offensive. You could call it maybe protecting those regions, but in order to protect those regions, are they going to have to do something a bit more serious to prevent the Ukrainian army from being able to attack them? You know what I mean? If I say, listen, don't do, look, I've set something in place now, and so you better not do anything. But if I believe that it's more than likely that you're going to ignore me and continue to do something, I need to have the means to stop you. Like you just said, they don't give, we just said, they don't give much credit to any legality. So this is part of Russia now. Well, we don't give a shit. It's still part of Ukraine as far as we're concerned. Russians know that. So if Russia is going to enforce that threat,
A new reality.
that new reality, it's going to have to put some boots on the ground. Of course, a lot of those troops their men have had some military training, like, you know, what do you call it?
I think everyone in Russia has now. Every male
What do you
has to
call
go
that
through some
term?
basic training.
Military. European countries used to have it.
Not a draft
Military
service.
Military service.
Yeah.
9 months or a year
Yeah.
military service or something. But they have to be trained. So it's going to take a few weeks to actually train those people because they're a bit rusty, obviously, and they have to be trained. They have to be shown which battalion they're going to, or where they're going to, what they're going to do, and train.
Surely
them.
they
So
won't be in the front lines even
No.
after that training.
I think a lot of. Well,
They're
the
going to
thing
be
is,
at the back,
well, not even at the back, but along the borders. This is another aspect of the escalation.
the old borders,
No, the borders of Russia with Ukraine, the northern borders.
the
of
new
Russia.
borders. Oh,
Well,
right, okay.
The new, mainly the new borders, but the whole border of Russia with Ukraine, to protect that, because there's troops all along the border with Russia and Ukraine, and obviously there's connections there with Belarus as well and stuff. So they would probably be switched out with troops, more regular troops with more experience or more combat experience who are protecting borders. Now, bring them closer to the front line and put some of these 300,000 into, you know, easier positions, let's say, or safer positions. But a lot of them also not going to the front line. There's a lot of support roles and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That they have to. But yeah, it's a lot of people. Like, and again, it's going to take a few weeks before they start being deployed. But what it actually means, if it is part of some big Russian offensive, we don't know. But certainly, it's a lot more troops than they've had so far. Maybe 5 or 6 times as many troops as they've had in Ukraine so far. So it does suggest something. Is it just offensive or is it offensive?
The media is
It
obviously shitting all over these referenda, sham referenda, you know, people being forced to vote and stuff. In reality, though, there's no video of people refusing to or mass protests against it or anything like that. It's happening. There's a lot of footage of Russians trapped in Ukraine. As Lavrov said, well, yeah, they're leaving Ukraine and they're taking their lands with them.
Yeah.
They are voting. It's a simple yes or no. Do you want to join Russia? The Ukrops in turn are targeting polling stations, of course, those that are open, and journalists and politicians. Did you see that they tried to take out Murad Gadzhiev,
No.
the RT journalist? Check this out. I think it's a short report from him just after his hotel room has been
Right, they bombed the hotel in
Kherson.
Kherson.
A missile strike on a hotel in Kherson that was housing journalists and local administrators or MPs.
Right.
So this is just after it happened. It's not too gruesome, but there's a guy, his cameraman, this is RT cameraman, trapped under rubble. He's okay, he makes it.
Это номер соседний от моего МЧС. Мы еще сюда они не поднялись. Мы решили ему помочь.
Okay, play this next one as well. It shows Gaziev.
It's been about 10 minutes. This is my room. In this room, this is closer to the impact site. We are told 2 people perished in there. But as you can see, it's worse down the corridor. There's a man screaming for help. I believe an engineering worker who was sent here to help. This is my room. The walls are barely standing. Inside, that's the bathroom wall. And there's someone trapped in the next room. So certainly a lot to get to at this point, but we are told emergency services are already downstairs trying to help.
Okay, so that was early this morning. Thankfully, Murad is alive and okay. The cameraman's also okay, but there was a politician. There was a guy, he is a Ukrainian MP, or he was a Ukrainian MP in the Rada in Kiev until a few years ago. His name is, so he was a member for Party of the Regions. Party of the Regions was the diplomatic term that the ethnic Russian majority in the East and South call themselves. I won't say we're the Russian party, but we're not also pro-Ukrainian. Anyway, this is the whole half of the country that would always vote for, the Yanukovychs or people who are more neutral. So this is a report. The guy's disabled. You'll see that he's in a kind of a primitive wheelchair. His name is Alexei Zuravko, Zuravko. This is him yesterday. You can play it. I think he's speaking Russian. He's going to register. He's going to vote.
Дорогие друзья, я приехал в город Алешки проголосовать, поставить свою галочку по поводу референдума. Вот мой паспорт, украинский. Вот мое заявление. Вот я внесен. И вот теперь я поставлю галочку. Да. За вхождение.
Da.
We'll leave it there. So rest in peace, Alexei Zuravko, because he was in the room next to Murad Gadzhiev and the Russian team. He was killed in this HIMARS strike this morning. They're thinking HIMARS because of how targeted it was. This is something. This is common. They do random shelling with MRLS, Grad missiles and stuff like that. But this was targeted. They wanted to kill him and probably Gadzhiev as well. It's just like bitter. They know who he is. He's ex-Rada. Just kill him. It's
not going to change anything.
It's not going to change anything.
Yeah.
So they've been doing that, for the last 8 years, haven't they? Obviously, it's just increased this year, targeting journalists and certain administrators. Like the head of the another region, or a mayor or something, was assassinated in a car bomb last week. And they'll justify, well, it's collaboration with the enemy, the invader and stuff. But they already know that, like, the invader's too big to push out. Like, and those damn people are all Russians. They want to be with Russia, so it's just spite. It's like, absolutely, they don't want them expressing their electoral rights, their voting right to live in a country of their choosing. So
not allowed to.
We'll kill them.
This is Lavrov at the UN. Just go to the very end. We'll put the link in the show description, but just go to the very end, because you would think he gave 24-minute speech at the UN, and we kind of talked a little bit about what he said. Multipolarity, US, can no longer sustain its hegemony. Basically, it's just not going to work, and it's resisting it, and there's not much we can do about it, but we're going to do something about it, us and our allies, blah, blah, blah. But at the very end, you'd think he would, at the UN, he'd be booed, right? And then that's the impression you get. But just go to the very end, like, go to, like, whatever it is, like, I'm talking about when he's finished his speech. Go to 23.
Said, and I quote, "The UN wasn't created to take mankind to paradise,
Well,
but
that's a good one.
rather
Go
to
back a little
save
bit.
humanity from hell. These are very habit in
Actually,
Resolution
he quotes
1244
Doug
and the
Hammarskjöld.
Dayton Peaceful Agreement." Madam President, at times like these, it's natural to seek wisdom from our predecessors. So, in the pithy expression of the former Secretary General Doug Hammarskjöld, who remembered the horrors of World War, he said, and I quote, "The UN wasn't created to take mankind to paradise, but rather to save humanity from hell." These are very topical words. They call upon us to understand our individual and collective responsibility for creating conditions for a peaceful and harmonious development for our future generations, and everyone need to show political will for that. When we are ready for such honest work, and we are convinced that the stability of the world order can be ensured exclusively through returning to the origins of the UN diplomacy, basing ourselves on the key principle of true democracy, the respect for the sovereign equality of states. I thank you.
Agradezco al ministro de Relaciones.
I thank
Get
the
out of
Minister
here,
for
you
Foreign
war
Affairs
criminal.
of the
Boo.
Russian
Well,
Federation.
he got his own. He got almost as much applause as Biden, but of course, the reporting on that by the media, you wouldn't get that impression. But it's interesting quote there from Doug Hammarskjöld that he was
And that he would cite him. The Russians probably know what happened to him.
It's
Alan Dulles had him assassinated in Africa.
Yeah. That the UN wasn't created to lead the world to paradise, but to keep it from descending into hell, which is, exactly true, exactly right, because basically there's no such thing, there is no paradise as people envision it. The main thing of cooperation between people, given human nature, is to prevent things from taking a very bad turn for the worse. But it seems that people today are willfully encouraging things to take a turn for the worse. It's almost like they're bored or something, and they want some kind of shit to hit the fan. They're tired of all this talk and fear mongering. Just get on with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
me too. In some sense, I'm like, just get on with it. Get the UN. Just ignore the UN in New York. Like, move it to China already. I mean, something like, depending on how you look at it, because no one's ever taken a global poll, but the lie that you're asked to believe is that the vast majority of the world thinks he's nuts.
Right.
And what planet is he living on? In reality, something like 80 and 90% of other countries support Russia. There's other photos as well. Lavrov was like, before his speech, people were the ambassadors and foreign ministers of other countries were queuing up to get autograph and photo taken with him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the real world order, but they have to go under the charade of going to New York, and the American government goes, well, we let him in. We're not sure we're going to let you in because you're Russian. At the last second, okay, here's a visa. You can come and give your stupid talk, which we won't even show our population anyway because you're evil Russian. So, like, let's just get it on with. Like, move it.
Yeah.
Just ignore it. It shouldn't
yeah.
be in New York anymore at this
Right.
point. That's obvious.
Yeah.
The US is completely rogue.
It's a
It's
rogue
done.
state.
Just ignore, move on.
Yeah.
But
And the important...
everything in its own time, I suppose. There's a lot of other steps to get
Yeah,
through first.
slowly. Yeah, the main thing about all this, about that, and pretty much most of what we've been saying is that people, if you're getting your information from the mainstream media only, you know, you're getting absolutely. Not only are you just getting one side of the story, but you're getting a very, very distorted version. You know, that isn't based in fact. And if you're interested in facts, then you got to assume. You can at this point assume that Western media, particularly on everything that they report on in terms of their enemies, the people they perceive as their enemies, it's somewhere between 50% and 100% a lie. And if you want to know what the truth is, you have to look beyond those headlines. You gotta really check into it. But like I said, I don't think many people are that interested. You know, the vast majority of people aren't interested at all and are just absorbing the propaganda, depending on which country they live in. And then the small minority that are tweeting furiously on social media, etc. They're, you know, most of them are, they're propagandists basically. That don't care for facts or truth or anything like that. They're just partisan up the wazoo.
They held a press conference after his speech. Maria Zakharova, together with Lavrov. I want to quote something from her. She says, "Remember, what Russia is doing now determines the future of mankind. Either we live free or we recognize ourselves as slaves in the colonies. This is very well understood on all continents."
They all know what they're doing.
They know what's going on.
Right.
They know others know, but they know others are scared to say that they know
Right.
what's going on.
Others are waiting to see what happens.
Yeah.
You always have those people who in any conflict who are sitting around waiting to see who's going to win.
In the end, this is the reason why the US could enforce Pax Americana, because certain types know that others need a leader, a patron, a big brother, or they're too scared not to
too
try
small.
and live without one. So Russia's messaging is all, don't we all want to be independent sovereign states? And everyone goes, yeah. But in their back of their mind, they're going, I can't do, I'm not good enough on my own.
I'm not good enough. Or
So they're waiting for Russia
or
to
they're
say,
saying-
here's an alternative patron for you.
Right. Well, you have to show that you're.
You got to
you're-
show that
you're
you
capable,
can
that you're
hold
capable
the
patron.
big one over there. the
Exactly,
big
because
mad
that's what they're
dog
saying.
back.
When in response to the question of don't we all want to be independent, you know, free, independent, equal states, whatever, they're like, yeah, but that guy over there, he said he'd beat the shit out of me if I if I agreed with you, so I don't want to say anything.
So can you like put him down first?
Yeah.
Then I'll join you,
Yeah.
hold your hands. Yeah.
Yeah, so you do that, and then I'll watch what happens, and then I'll decide who I want to be friends with. Anyway, that's human nature. It's almost like human nature that you've seen play out among individuals writ large, you know, on a global scale, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not the best of humanity, let's say. Although that's particularly in the West. There are others being a bit more adult about the whole situation. Anyway, that's all I've got. You got anything more?
Lavrov in the same press conference, the European Union is sliding into dictatorship. I know dictatorship's a word that's thrown around all the time, but
Yeah.
I think when he says it, he means it. And he has von der Leyen in mind, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And last thing was Roger Waters, Pink Floyd frontman, had to
Right.
cancel his concerts in Ukraine or in Poland because he wasn't fully behind, you know, Slava Ukraini.
I've heard him speak since, and actually they cancelled it for him.
Yeah, it was cancelled. He
Right.
didn't cancel it. It was cancelled
Yeah.
because he said some things that weren't Slava Ukraini. Were actually telling the truth about the situation. Some Polish, probably the government or something, said, "Yeah, we don't want you here." That's how mature these people are. Anyway, yeah. So we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for commenting. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for commenting and chatting and watching, of course. Don't forget to smash all the buttons, whatever they are. And we'll be back next week with another show. So until then, have a good one.
Thanks for watching. See you next week.
can't stop the signal now.